And more on 9/11. Our next guest is a veteran with 28 years in military service. He helps us look back on that fateful day. Joining us now to reflect on the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the war on terror that followed is retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub. He's a former Black Hawk helicopter pilot and battalion commander and the co-founder of Restore Liberty. Thank you for coming on the show today, Darin.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you start by telling us where you were on September 11th, 2001, and what stuck out to you the most during the immediate aftermath?
Sure. Yeah, I was in Fort Carson, Colorado, at a school on post there, and we had all come out of the classroom, and frankly, nobody really knew that it had happened, but we all looked at the TV and were shocked at what we saw. We're like, you had to be convinced it was real. It's just one of those things that you're not sure is real until a little time develops. But I think what stuck out to me the most was actually the part where we were all sent home immediately because they didn't know what they were dealing with, and it was best to leave the post, Fort Carson itself, empty or mostly empty. And when times of crisis, people look to organizations that they trust, and the military has always been one of those organizations. And they were all looking at me, going, "Well, what's next?" And I could tell them I didn't know, but the best thing to do was just stay on firm ground and trust that the truth would come out, and that eventually that we would do something. I was certain of that.
Yeah, just so much uncertainty on that day, and the nation changed on 9/11, and we're also able to see what it truly means to be united. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, what a difference 20 years can make, right? I mean, it's strange to think about the fact that when this first happened, it was over 2 decades ago now, and you saw a nation that came together and rallied behind what we would call a common enemy or common foe. And 20 years later, as a nation at war turned into more of a at war, while most of the nation had moved on, we see this division today that in many cases I would argue is intentional in some cases, but also needs to be something that we need to revisit again. Is like, what does it mean to be a United States and not a divided States 20 years after 9/11 that united us in the first place?
Yes, and when was your first deployment after 9/11, and how many deployments have you done during your career?
Well, actually, the first deployment after 9/11 was to North Africa. We went to Egypt for a multinational NATO exercise, and that was 2 weeks after 9/11 happened. So you can imagine how the rumors spun back home about where we really were and what we were really doing. Well, we were taking part in that exercise. But as soon as we got back, shortly thereafter, moved to Fort Drum, New York, and deployed to Afghanistan for the first time in 2003 in Kandahar. And
what was your time like in Afghanistan?
Well, each of the deployments was different in its own right, different jobs. But being an intelligence officer, being a company commander the second time, and flying all over northeast Afghanistan, third time being a strategist and developing orders and strategies for an entire country. And then going back there again and spending most of my fourth and final deployment watching the country get drawn down, and spending, frankly, almost 9 months at night flying night missions. It's just interesting to see the country change from 2003 to 2013.
Yes, absolutely. Now, America went to war in October 2001. What can we learn from the war on terror in hindsight?
Well, there are always many things we can learn. And the military is always learning, even at the tactical level, soldiers on the ground and how they do their business. But we as a nation have to keep remembering that forced democracy is not democracy. A constitutional republic like the United States, the model and the people that are here and how things are done here, can't just be injected overseas in a nation like Afghanistan, whose culture is so significantly different. Not only that, we can't build nations. We shouldn't want to build nations. We should have a very narrow mission, and then when that mission is completed, we should be willing to step aside and come home and be like, they need to decide their own future. And the last thing I would argue is that we need to make sure that when we as a nation go to war, the entire nation is behind the military, because we can have the greatest technology, the greatest soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and things like that, but if the entire nation and the weight of the people are not behind them the entire time, then we'll stumble and fall too, because the military needs the people of America to be behind them.
Very good to hear your perspective. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub, great to speak with you today.
Thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.